we want to wish you a very warm welcome to this Wild Seed Collection Best Practices webinar. We're really excited to present on this work. So today I'm going to share a little bit about the Northeast Seed Network, and then I'll turn it over to Sephra, who will share some background and context about seed collection work and supporting a robust seed supply chain. And then we'll hand it to Jordy and Heather to talk about seed collection best practices geared towards the audience of land trust staff and partners, as well as many others. And then we'll have a pretty long question and answer session as well. So the Northeast Seed Network is an alliance of regional seed partnerships, and our focus is really on helping to foster communication, knowledge sharing, and creating communities of practice to enhance the accessibility of diverse source-identified native seed and plant materials for ecological restoration, ecological landscaping, and regenerative agriculture across the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. And the Northeast Seed Network is coordinated right now by the Ecological Health Network, but we have over 150 partners and members, and we are growing. And our
Can
vision
I
really,
interrupt you real quick? I
yes.
think your presentation mode is in not presentation mode. We can see your notes and things like that if you want to.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
no worries.
I am, that's confusing to me because I see, let me try again. Okay, what about now?
We can still see the slides along the bottom.
Okay. Hmm.
And the next slide.
Okay, what about now?
Yay.
Yes.
There you
Uh,
go.
Thank you so
Perfect.
much for letting me know that. I really appreciate it. Okay, so our vision is a future in which a robust seed and plant supply chain formed through collaboration, coordination, and resource sharing supports resilient and healthy landscapes. And I said that we're a regional alliance of seed partnerships and hubs, and here's a map to show some of our partnerships and hubs. As you can see, there's many of them overlap. They're of different sizes, they're of different ages. Some have been around for a few years, some are just getting off the ground and developing. If anybody's interested in learning more about our network members and partners, you can go to the Ecotype Projects Network map, and there you can search by who's actually in your eco-region or what kind of role an organization might be playing in the supply chain. And really what we're really focused on is trying to build these trusted reciprocal relationships among all of these different organizations, entities, companies that are doing this work here in our region. And please check out our website because we have other upcoming events. May 18th, we have our network-wide check-in meeting, and that's going to be a great overview with updates from all of our working groups and our committees, our hubs, our partnerships, our work that we want to do over the next year. We will also be announcing dates of in-person network gatherings that we're starting to plan for the summer and the fall. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which is another great place to get information, and we also post regularly on Instagram. So with that, I'm going to hand it now to Sephra to give us some background and context about seed supply chains.
Thank you, Eve. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here speaking to you all today. And by the fact that you're already here in this meeting, I'm sure a lot of what I'm going to go over, perhaps you already know, but we all want to make sure we're on the same baseline as we kind of launch this work from the Northeast Seed Collective with the Land Trust to understand what the background of what we've been doing up until now has been. So in 2015, all across the Bureau of Land Management, a lot of federal organizations, um, all came together and they said, we don't have across our country a backup supply of truly local native seed to be able to do ecological restoration if there's man-made or natural disasters. We don't have any seeds backed up. So this large national seed strategy was written, it was launched, and since that time, seed networks all across the country have formed that have been working on the issue of amplifying truly local native seed, where each organization and network has their auspices, where they work and they function. And the whole point of the National Seed Strategy is to be able to have the right seed in the right place and the right time. And what this does is this seed strategy has really fostered a lot of interagency collaboration and has helped develop the availability of this seed across our country through these templates that they laid out of how this work can be done. We can go to the next slide. So first, just as where a lot of us are based, and on the call, I was seeing most people are in the Northeast here. A lot of this work was really happening out west, where there's a lot of federal lands, and they have tons of room and tons of area to be able to do seed collections from, to do grow outs from. It's a really entirely different landscape from a seed collecting and growing perspective. If you look at the next image, here in the Northeast, we don't really have those large national parks, a lot of that federally owned land, but what we do have a lot of are land trusts. And so, really, within the fragmented landscapes of the Northeast, the land trusts really provide kind of the best opportunity to be able to collect and safeguard and regrow out these populations of plants that we're going to be talking about. So, I just wanted you to see those two maps as a juxtaposition of kind of how lands are stewarded in the West and by whom, and how lands and stewarded in the East and by whom. So the next image from the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank a few years ago, it's kind of slides a little bit cut off, but they did a great survey about commercial availability and use of native seed in the Northeast. And what each of those red dots is showing you is that um, in that locality, the plants and the native plants that they're looking for aren't available for 400 miles. So a lot of, the work that we do in kind of the world of ecology is understanding our watersheds. Where does our water come from and go to? Then there was the big movement around our food sheds. Who are your farmers? Get your food locally and know who your farmers are. And now, as Kay Green from the Hudson Valley Seed Company coined, now we need to think about our seed sheds. So, where are we collecting, growing, and resharing seeds in this localized manner to have the genetically appropriate material be able to come from and go back into the living seed bank to put the right plants in the right place? So, the next image um, is now we need to think about what geographic scope are we going to utilize? And so this is the level 3 ecoregional map from the EPA. And James Obernick was the lead author on this. And he said, if we want to work collectively to do true conservation and restoration, we need to go beyond the zone maps or just looking at geology, hydrology, um, ornithology, all of these great ology words. But what we need to do is we need to overlay all these disparate sciences and their data to have this collective kind of slightly broad stroke artistic framework of saying within these ecoregions, we know from, again, that genetics perspective that there's enough similarity going on here between soils and geography, and forest cover, et cetera, that we can collect seeds within these different ecoregions and share them within those ecoregions and know again that we're putting the right plants in the right place. So they're beautiful maps, and wherever you're located, zooming in on them is quite an exciting activity to see. It's actually not so intuitive sometimes where the ecoregions go to and from. So I encourage you all to check out that map. The next slide. Okay, so my assumption here is most people on this call know what an ecotype is, but an ecotype is a plant that has measurable adaptations to the location in which it is co-evolved, also called a wild type or a straight native species. So these are geographically specific and genetically appropriate. So if you think about when you're walking out in truly wild, hopefully undisturbed lands, wherever you are, those plants, those heirlooms of the pollinators that have been growing in tandem in time immemorial, ever changing, ever adapting with everything that's going on around it, that is what an ecotype is. And that, as the next slide will show you, and as Ed Toth of the Mid-Atlantic Regional Seed Bank says, that these types of seeds provide the greatest assurance of short-term establishment and long-term persistence and ecological integration. Excuse me. When we're bringing in seeds and plants, often, you know, that are grown out in Minnesota or other parts of the country, they're adapted to those soils and those daylight temperatures, and the pollinators know how to recognize those genetics. But when you bring those to other places, they aren't able to persist in the landscape because it is a different set of all of those things that I just mentioned before. So when we're talking about doing true restoration that can last, we want to make sure that we're mimicking and being able to implement as much as possible that which is already going on around us on our land trusts, in our wildlands, and just helping to proliferate that throughout our ecoregional corridors. So the next slide. So here with Dina Brewster, who's also on the call, we started the Ecotype project to create a template of how this work can be done in the Northeast. And again, we don't have those huge swaths of lands like they do out in the West. So we work with smallhold farmers. We work with, land trust, places that have access to land that we can work with botanists such as and seed collectors like Jordy and Heather, who you'll hear from, who go out with a target species list. They collect the seeds, they winter sow or they germinate those plugs. We would bring those to farmers or seed producers who put 200 plugs of one species into a row, just like you would grow your tomatoes or any other crop. But this was for the specialty crop of the ecotypic seed. And then we help mentor them to know when to collect the seed at the appropriate time, and then started the Northeast Seed Collective to be able to have a place for the seeds to be able to be cleaned, and to be able to be made available for commercial use. So this slide here is the beautiful seed increase plots at the Hickories, Dina's farm in Ridgefield, Connecticut. You can see the Joe Pye and the New York ironweed. And it really is quite stunning and it's amazing. We say the ROI of seed. You plant one and the next year you have thousands. And so it's really quite such a positive and exciting solution to a lot of the challenges that we face. And it's really just becomes this symphony of ecology. You see all of these amazing pollinators that you never knew existed. The more biodiversity of plants you have on your landscapes, like at all the land trusts that you all are at, the more biodiversity of pollinators and beneficial species that we see. So it's beautiful work. And again, the exciting part is, almost 7, 8 years ago when we started talking about this work in the Northeast, there really wasn't anywhere to purchase or buy this ecotypic, eco-regional, genetically appropriate, source-identified provenance seed. But now you all know what all those fancy words mean. And now there is the Northeast Seed Collective that makes these seeds available. But more importantly, I think for this conversation is that the origins of where a lot of these species that are now available for end users to use came from seed collections made on land trusts by both Jordy and Heather. And so land trusts are this huge, amazing piece of the pie that has been integrated, but kind of has been missing in terms of creating these standards and protocols to have throughout the Land Trust Alliance writ large be able to be integrated in this type of seed propagation and amplification and restoration work. So I will now hand it over to Jordy, who will explain all the nuance of how that can happen on your land trusts. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sefra. I'm Jordy Elkins. I'm the director at Highstead in Redding, Connecticut. And we've been working with seed collecting, I don't know, since the Northeast Seed Network started and probably before. But as Sephra laid out sort of this dynamic between the East and the West and how land is owned and, how permission is obtained to access seed, the question is, how do we really develop strong seed collecting programs that maintain a high ethical standard and protect the wild plants to make sure that these natural populations aren't harmed and that we're genuinely advancing our goals of landscape restoration and protection. And I think, a big part of it really starts in that relationship between the land manager and the seed collector and making sure that there's a well-founded relationship there committed to conservation and restoration. If you could change the slide, Eve. So done well, seed collecting really is a conservation action. At this point, some land trusts are involved with either collecting seed in-house or partnering with outside seed collectors, but it's not that widely done. But I think it's something that is really on mission for land trusts. Conserved land plays such an important role in protecting habitat for wildlife and plants, for securing pure, clean water, and for land trusts play such an important role in making sure that land is there, for future generations and to protect us from climate change. And there's such a broad swath of activities and missions that land trusts are involved in. I really think that seed collecting is one that is absolutely kind of on mission. There's more than just protecting plant habitat, but land trusts and land managers can really play a role in actively engaging with and fortifying natural plant habitat. And this can happen both on their own preserves, but also more broadly across the community. As the demand for these locally sourced seeds has, really kind of taken off, land managers are increasingly being asked to allow seed collecting on the preserves. And this growing interest really makes it essential that land managers understand that seed collecting can't be an extractive activity. It's got to be done well. It has to be done in ways that advance stewardship and land protection goals. And it can be done in a way that pertains to our properties, but also takes the mission of conserving land and restoring it off of the boundaries of land trusts and conserved lands. If you'd switch, please, Eve. So, one thing that's really important in sort of developing good seed collecting protocols is making sure that land trusts or any conserved land has a strong management plan that sort of dictates how the land is managed and protected, and that there are also good seed guidelines that talk about how seed collecting is done and how it's done ethically. And one of the most important elements of that is this idea that we're trying to conserve genetic diversity. Protected properties function as sort of natural seed refuges, and they're capable of supporting ecological restoration, climate adaptation efforts, agroforestry, and broader landscape scale restoration efforts. And seed collecting can boost some of these programs. Protecting plants where they grow naturally has been a long-standing kind of mission of land trusts. But there's, we call that in situ conservation, protecting something in place. But there are also opportunities for land trusts to scale up some of that protection and really get involved with sort of ex situ or off-site conservation. If you think about your computer files, you have like offsite cloud backup. In a similar way, seed collecting programs can offer that type of resilience. They can help establish populations of plants in areas where they don't currently exist. Maybe they existed there formerly, but deer or climate change or development, something disturbed it and that's gone. But now there are opportunities to restore some of these plant populations where they formerly were, further enhancing the resilience of the landscape. Additionally, some seed collecting policies also include long-term storage in a seed bank. And you can sort of think of this as like the genetic Noah's Ark in a sense, that as landscape restoration projects are going on, a small portion of that can be put in a bank where it could be held for longer term purposes. Great. All right. One thing, wild seed collection supports stewardship and ecological restoration, both on property and off property. I talked about that a little bit. But what do some of those projects look like? In its simplest form, a landscape restoration and seed collecting project can look like collecting seed on a land trust from a plant population that may be struggling, growing that seed and planting it back on the same landscape it was collected from in order to bolster that natural population. There are opportunities for land managers and land trusts to partner with regional restoration initiatives. For instance, think of like a pollinator pathway or similar type of initiative where organizations and individuals are restoring land off of a land trust property, but land trusts can support that effort by making locally sourced seed available to some of those types of efforts. And then there are also opportunities for land trusts to partner with organizations or companies that can increase the amount of seed and make it commercially available. This way, when people are looking for native plant seed, it's taking the pressure off of wild populations and reducing the need to go out and collect seed. But there are actually cultivated sources of seed that was originally sourced from a wild population, but now in cultivation. And that becomes available for landscape restoration efforts. And then switching to the next slide, seed collecting really can be thought of as a stewardship activity. It can help enhance landscape stewardship because, how often is it that a land trust has a botanist or plant expert going out doing, detailed assessments of plant communities on your preserves. And a well-formulated seed collecting program will involve land trusts and plant collectors working in tandem with each other, keeping records on plant health and the size of populations, keeping track of what's been collected and how things are doing out on the landscape. So it really gives a very fine look at a population of plants that may otherwise, just they're part of what's there, but they're not really getting sort of frequent and close assessment. And a lot of times a seed collection policy can help bring some of that. Next slide, please. So I think one thing that's really important is that it's essential that seed collecting isn't haphazard. It really has to be done in a coordinated effort between the landowner and the seed collector, and really done with good policies and agreements in place that protect the wild plant populations. So at the core of any seed collecting policy that's developed, there has to be this clear ethical framework that prioritizes conservation outcomes. It really has to be a conservation effort. And framing the work in this way reinforces the idea that seed collecting is only done when it's absolutely necessary, right? In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to take resources out of the wild. But by doing it very judiciously in ways that we can, bring plants into cultivation and reduce that, it becomes a win-win. It's also important that any collecting is done to strengthen ecosystems and not sort of commodify a wild product where we're, sort of exploiting the land. It's absolutely essential that good policies help protect from those types of activities. And so this conservation ethic is, of course, essential. It seems obvious, but putting strong policies like this in place will help sort of weed out partnerships with unscrupulous people or organizations. So protecting and supporting these wild plant populations has to be the priority. And the Northeast Seed Network recommends developing seed collecting policies before any collection is taken place, just to make sure that it's well thought out and kind of mapped out, that we're using qualified and trained seed collectors, and that there's this mutual commitment to stewardship and maintaining the ecological integrity of the land. Yeah, so we'll move on. And then, I think one thing that's important, Sephra talked about the network and some of the hubs that exist out there. And it's important not to go about it alone. There's no reason for any organization to feel like they have to reinvent the wheel and sort of develop their own seed collecting policy and figure this all out. You think about a house, one person doesn't build it, a carpenter frames it, an electrician wires it, a plumber, everybody works in their areas of expertise. And seed collecting can work in the same way, where partners come together, each working in their area of expertise and strength, but working for a collective conservation outcome. And a couple ways that the Northeast Seed Network is helping to facilitate that is we are developing and have developed resources specifically for land trusts and land managers to help them understand the ins and outs of developing seed collecting policies and working with seed collectors, and how to form strong partnerships. And so there are a few documents that are literally coming off the press as we speak. But one is a wild seed collecting protocol that is the Northeast Seed Network's sort of standard guidelines for any seed collecting activity that takes place. And that really gives more of an in-depth sort of nuts and bolts about, collecting and protocols and how to go about it. And then a second document that's been developed is wild seed collecting messages and protocols for land trusts. And this is really focused for land managers or land trusts, land owners that want to develop strong policies for working with seed collectors. As Sephra talked about, the Northeast Seed Network has other resource and guidelines and can help connect you to other people and individuals in your region. There are the seed hubs that they talked about. The network map are both great resources to learn about what's happening in your area and having ways of connecting with other people who are also committed to collecting seed and increasing the availability of wild collected seed in your area. Great. So Heather's going to share a little bit about some sort of examples of partnerships.
Hi, good morning. I'm really excited to be here and loving that there's almost 90 people on this call. My name is Heather Lilliengren. I have been seed collecting throughout the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast since 2008. So I'm very lucky to have called this my career. And in the last 3 years, I've been up in the northwest part of Connecticut in Litchfield County with my own consulting company, starting to do seed collection in this area of the Northeast. And what I found so amazing when I moved up here, I was so used to working with state governments and county governments and different government agencies. And really, the largest landholders in the Northeast, some of are land trusts. And if you do not work for the government, most people don't want to do business with you. They like to keep it close. So, as a seed collector, I decided to approach land trusts in my region to see if they would be open to the idea of seed collection. And I wanted to just discuss some of these partnerships in progress. And if you go to the next slide, it all really started with approaching different land trusts in Litchfield County and asking for permits for wild collections. One of the documents that the Northeast Seed Network will be putting out is an example permit letter on how you would approach, a landowner and ask for permission to do wild collection. And really, it's important to explain, the reason for collection. There should always be a goal for collection. And when I started my permits with these different land trusts, my goal was to get the basic germplasm needed for seed increase plots. I was working with a farmer in Ecoregion 58 in Northwest Connecticut that wanted to transfer a lot of his veg plots over to seed increase. And I needed to get that original material to start those plots. So it was their first kind of even introduction to seed collection. They were excited about it. And throughout that first year of collecting, they also received, my species list that I had made when I was out hiking around looking for different plant populations. They were able to have that information, which just bolstered their own inventories. So it was really a good introductory relationship that we had. And once they sort of realized the work that could be done and how this could be something that could benefit their own properties, because they had been doing so much invasive species management and they were kind of at this next step of now what, it really turned into looking at management plans and restoration projects within their own preserves. So you can go to the next slide. I specifically did a project with the Kent Land Trust where it again started with, these permits for wild seed collection. And they had this grant that they were applying for. It was a Climate Smart Land Stewardship Grant. It was going to be for a meadow restoration project. And they brought me in to write this management plan for them using ecotypic material that was going to be collected from their preserves as well as other land trusts in the county. So what was really amazing about this is that this meadow was identified by the Audubon Society as critical bird habitat. It was overrun with invasive shrubs. They did a whole shrub removal. And then it was, how do we make this the best bird habitat possible? And that's really where the idea came in, that we could be doing the seed collection on their properties and then putting this seed back into the landscape. And all the while getting their volunteers involved, which was incredible because they were able to aid in that effort of seed collection, seed cleaning, direct seeding, and planting, the whole circle, to really show the value of this work. Next slide. So we had a volunteer work day for seed collection. We went out to a different meadow within a different preserve where it was some great, intact native habitat where we were able to collect a number of species on this Saturday morning, where I did a quick, intro to all the volunteers that showed up, and everybody got their own species that they were going to go after. I had previously gone out to make sure that the species were indeed ready for collection. And it was this whole volunteer effort out in the field one day. And it was a great hands-on community project and a really aha moment for a lot of people that, were saying, well, why are we collecting Canada goldenrod? I just cut this down in my yard. But we were trying to restore areas that had, mugwort infestation, and we needed a really good, strong, aggressive native species that would do that work in a field of mugwort to try to rehabilitate it. So it was this great aha moment for people to realize that some of these species, that they just gloss over, are some of the best workhorse species that are just out there in our backyards. So the project goals for the whole meadow restoration were to increase diversity, soften this forest to meadow transition, especially in regards to bird habitat, having those shrubs that are berry producing for birds was really important in this particular project. Managing the early successional habitat and establishing more pollinator habitat. So I spent a year in 2025. I collected 17 different species from a number of different preserves within the Kent Land Trust and also some of the neighboring land trust properties. And it represented 8 different perennial species and 9 different shrub species. So that right there, within one season of collection, I was able to really, increase the diversity that was going to be in this meadow for the long-term project. Next slide. And after this collection, event, we needed to then do a lot of seed cleaning. So we had a big volunteer seed cleaning event, and it was a, November evening, and we were just in this, office with a bunch of people, hand picking and rubbing seed. And it was a great effort because a lot of the seed that we were cleaning for, this bulk seed collection that we had done, it was going to be for direct seeding into that meadow. So you can go to the next slide. And then in December of that year, we went and we prepped areas within the meadow and did direct winter sowing of the seed that we had collected that fall. And then I did a survey the next spring, and a lot of those species had already started to germinate. So it was a great, full circle event that people were able to participate in and really understand how valuable this work can be and how it can be completely in-house. Next slide. And then a lot of that seed also is being contract grown by nurseries, local nurseries, to then be planted back into this meadow restoration. So part of the budget was specifically for contract growing this wild collected seed. We were able to involve 2 different local nurseries to do this growing. So it's infusing, the local economy as well. And then we get to have those completely local, adapted, ecotypic plants to put back out into the landscape. Next slide. So that was one example of a way that you can have partnerships with seed collectors. And then another example was with the Sharon Land Trust. Again, this was a land trust that I had approached for permits for wild seed collection. And once they kind of understood, what I was doing in the region and whatnot, they decided to see if this seed that was being grown by farmers throughout Connecticut was available for these custom seed mixes that they were going to need for I think they had 7 to 10 different sites that they were looking to get seed mixes for after they had done invasive species removal and different areas that needed to be restored. So what was cool about this is that, they had originally just thought that they could go to any, seed company and just order a generalized mix. And they realized that, why would they be getting seed from so far away if they could utilize these resources that were here, that someone was actually on their preserves collecting the seed. So it was a really cool project to work on. I made 7 different custom native seed mixes for these different areas within the Sharon Land Trust. And it was an interesting project because we not only relied on this, super hyper local seed, but also there are just some species that are not available yet locally that Ernst Seed has, and Ernst Seed does provide ecotypes. You do have to search for their ecotypes, but this was a combined use of seed available in the region to create these genetically adapted functional seed mixes to be put across the preserves. And if you go to the next slide, I'll just show you a quick example. This is just, one of the custom seed mix recipes that were made. And you can see how it's a mix of the Ernst seed and then the seed from the Northeast Seed Collective. And I really tried to concentrate on using species, the most hyperlocal species from the Northeast Seed Collective that would be important for pollinators that are, here, that were adapted here. Oh, I went backwards. And then I, use the Ernst seed for more of our grasses and whatnot that aren't as important to pollinators. So this is just a couple examples of how this work can be done and projects that are happening now. And I think this is where we open it up for some questions.
Thank you so much, Heather, Sephra, and Jordy. And yes, before we jump into the question and answer session, I just want to say that the work that we did with the Standards and Protocols Committee for the Northeast Seed Network to develop the protocols for wild seed collection and then the key messages and best practices for land trusts. This was made possible with a grant from the Land Trust Alliance, and so we're deeply grateful for that support. And we're very grateful to the Standard and Protocols Committee and the working group that has been working on this for how long, Jordy? I think over a year, right? Maybe 18 months?
Yeah, about a year and a half. Yeah.
And we will be emailing everybody with those documents as a follow-up to this webinar. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions. You can feel free to raise your hand and let us know your question, or use the chat, put your questions there, and we'll respond. Susan McDonald asked if there's a resource that specifies protocols for growing out common native species after collection.
So the answer to that is that work is actually just starting right now. The Standard and Protocols Committee started first on developing protocols for seed collecting. And now that work is wrapping up. There's actually a meeting tomorrow of a continuation of that working group that will be looking specifically at in growing and increased protocols. So that will be done, I don't know, 6 to 12 months from now, hopefully.
Thanks. And then we also had another question about any resources for learning about how to clean and process native seed, and can you explain the process of direct seeding into a meadow?
As for resources, I don't know if the NRCS has anything out or the Plant Materials Center that does a lot of the seed cleaning. I know that there are organizations, the one that I came from, the Greenbelt Native Plant Center, which is now the Plant Ecology Center down in New York City. They have so many records of how to clean and process almost 600 plus native species. But for something that's public out there, I don't have a very good answer for that. The process of direct seeding into a meadow, we picked areas that there was just soil exposure because of what just a kind of what was going on in that meadow, especially where they had done some large shrub removal. So we had prepped areas that just had naturally exposed soil, and in winter you just have to make sure that you're going out there with seed that we added some moistened pine shavings as just a carrier agent. Use like a 2-to-1 ratio with the seed, and we were just raking it in with a steel rake just to get that direct soil to seed contact. And the carrier agent helps a little with predation. It covers the seed a bit where it's not just a open buffet for birds, which you always have to be concerned about. But yeah, like a winter end of like late fall, early winter before the ground is frozen is a great time to do seeding in a meadow.
Okay, a few more questions about volunteers. So, do you have any data, Heather, on the volunteer hours it took for the collection and cleaning for the 2025 project? And then could you just talk a little bit more about recruiting volunteers? Is there regular rotation of the same volunteers, and what sizes of groups have been successful? I just want to make a plug too that we had a webinar in, I think it was March, about engaging volunteers in seed production, and that is up on our website, so that's extra resource, but I'll hand it over now to you, Heather, to answer.
Yeah, the Kent Land Trust really leaned on their own volunteer base and their own social media to really blast out these different events. I would say that usually it seems that there's the same group of people that come to these types of events. And I would, there was probably between 7 to 12, 15 people that came out, which was completely manageable for both events. And I think the number of hours, we had spent probably 3 to 4 hours out in the field collecting that day, and that was coming together, kind of having an intro session in the morning, everyone understanding the species that they were going to be collecting from, doing making sure that we were moving throughout the entire populations of these species. So that is part of your collection protocol, is to make sure that you're moving throughout the entire population. So whether that be covering an entire meadow or a meadow system, to make sure you're getting genetics from the entire population was important. And then we did have to do a little bit of finishing on the seed cleaning. We could not get it all done in that evening that we were there, but we had gotten a really good start on it with just a lot of extra hands for, 2 to 3 hours. But the initial hand seed cleaning does take longer than you might think, but it is good meditative work. So, it was some of the Kent Land Trust staff and myself that finished up the seed cleaning to have it ready for that direct seeding and then the contract growing.
Great. So Henry asked, is there a centralized database of seed pedigree and genetic lines across the region to help track sources and ecotypes and a matching standardized data structure to feed into it? Great question, Henry. Anyone want to talk about that?
The short answer is no. It's something that, we have talked about and aspired to. One of the strengths of our network is that it's very diffuse and sort of grassroots. But when that comes to, consolidating information, it makes it a little more challenging. But there are efforts and kind of talks to sort of think through how we could do something like that. But it's a big nut to crack.
So 2 questions. One from Audrey, can you explain the purpose of seed cleaning and does it lead to a higher germination rate? And then from Sam, asking about if we have concerns, thoughts about how long a wild collected species in human cultivation can exist before it affects the genetic diversity.
You want to take the first one, Heather, and I'll take the second?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there are all levels of seed cleaning that should occur, but any level is better than none. It really is you're trying to get as much of that extra material off the seed. So whether that be, extra stem material, leaves, flower parts, seed coat coverings, it will always aid in a better germination because number one, you're removing any pathogens that might be on that extra plant material that could inhibit the germination or any extra insects that might be left on that plant material that might eat the seed. So getting it down to the purest form that you can get is important. And a lot of that can be done with hand cleaning. You do not need machines. If you noticed in the photos of everyone's seed clean, we were just using these rubber mats, these black rubber mats. It's actually stair tread that I got at an Ace Hardware. And you use the stair tread with a block that has the stair tread wrapped around it as well. And that creates the friction to kind of remove that seed coat covering and remove the seed from the different plant materials. So between stair tread and some sieves, you can get it pretty clean without any machines.
Yeah, and then regarding the second question about seed increase plots and genetic drift, like a lot of the issues that we deal with, the answer is it depends. So if you think about if you were to have a plot of oak trees that are very long lived and you can trace them back to the original plant that you planted there, you have a way of knowing, these are or aren't, changing. They're not reseeding and, sort of muddling the genetics. But if you've got, shorter lived perennials, they're reseeding back into your seed increase plots. Those could absolutely be, crossbreeding with themselves and, changing the genetic makeup of that plot. You don't really have any way of tracking that or knowing exactly what's happening. So part of the seed increase working group that's working now will be addressing some of those issues in the products that come out in the future.
Great. Okay. Question from Aaron. How is your timing with flowering time and seed collection? Are there any resources for determining when seed will be ready to collect after flowers have passed?
Um, the I think the most accessible resource that you could find that has a range for seed collection is Lady Bird Johnson. Their database that they have on their website is great. It will give you usually just like a month range or so of when collection time would be for seeds. Um, and I, you know, other than that, I mean, I don't know if there's any other institution that has published specific date ranges because it will vary from region to region. Um, but I think it's really more about understanding when seed is ripe and understanding the different cues that each plant species will give you. Some of them are very specific, and then they're very generalized things like, is the seed coat hard? Has it changed color? Has the fruit changed color? There are certain things that you can do to indeed know if the seed is ready to collect. People do cut tests in the field to see if the embryo inside is filling the entire seed coat. There are a lot of things that you can physically do to know if the seed is indeed ready for collection, or just visually understand if it's ready. And that will change from species to species. But getting that initial kind of range, you can find that out for a lot of species on Lady Bird Johnson.
All right, we're at time. There's a few more questions. I don't know if we want to keep going. Heather, Jordy, do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Sure, I have a
Okay.
couple minutes.
All right, just two more questions. One is coming from Allie. How did you know how to collect enough seed for the direct seeding contract growing? Did you set a goal by pounds? If you have any data, she would be interested in knowing that. And then another question about after receiving the plugs back from the nurseries, how did you use them at the land trust, and did you rely on volunteers for planting them, and how did you handle the irrigation?
Okay. So for the direct seeding, we did, that was the volunteer bulk collection day. So that's where you're really looking at like envelopes full of collected seed to really produce that bulk material for a direct seeding. It is different for the contract growing where, I I made larger collections than needed for the contract growing. But I there was at least definitely enough uh, for the propagator to use in case there was indeed failure, or because we were not cleaning mechanically, it's a lot harder to know if you have empty seed. So just making sure that you're collecting enough to account for any empties as well. So it wasn't by pounds. We were not at that scale at all. But I think when I'm collecting, I'm more focused on making sure I get that very diverse genetic sample first before I am looking at the quantity. But for example, the shrub species that I collected, I did not need to make huge collections of these shrub species. So I was just making sure that I was moving throughout the population and grabbing, a few seeds from a shrub here and there just to make sure that I was getting that genetic sample. But yeah, it also depends on the species. Like you collect a lot more aster seed because there are a lot of empties than you would, um, you know, a, a species that is a one-seeded, berry on a shrub. And then what was the other one?
If
Something about
um
irrigation.
yes, how you handled the receiving the plugs and if volunteers planted them and I guess irrigated them as well.
Right. It was volunteer planting. Also the stewardship manager took a lot of that work on himself. That is one of the paid employees of the Kent Land Trust. I know that some land trusts do not have any paid employees, so that is a difference. Um, but yes, it was relying on volunteers for the planting. Irrigation. This particular site did have um, a hose bib from an old standing. This used to be where the meadow was an old Girl Scouts historical site. So there, I believe there was a hose bib that we were able to get water from, but they would also truck water in just to do that initial watering. And we did a lot of weather monitoring. We were trying to seed and plant before rain events. That is another thing that is helpful to try and do, to have the Mother Nature just work with you on these things. um, and we were not planting in the middle of the summer. Like we were definitely using the time of year properly.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. We will follow up with the recording and also the two documents that we mentioned. And please check out our website for upcoming events and consider joining us on May 18th for a very comprehensive overview of all of the things the Northeast Seed Network and our partners and hubs are working on. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your week.